Today, in episode 231 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to expert Paul Glover, and he's going to tell you how you can get past the dysfunctional workplace and get moving in the right direction. It's all about dysfunction today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership, those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for tuning in. And if you're listening to this real time, yes, I am still in beautiful Newport, Rhode Island, hanging out with the U.S. Navy folks and having a great time at it. So shout out to my AMP class if you're tuning in, which apparently some of you are. All right, today we are talking about team dysfunction because we all have super performing teams without any issues, right? I mean, all of our teams are peak performing, and everyone gets along, and everyone is on point 100% of the time, right? No, not at all. And yes, even my teams have dysfunction from time to time. And that's what we're talking about today, because guess what? There is no perfect team out there. And you might go, Scott, but my team is perfect. They are awesome. Well, you know what? From time to time, teams dysfunction. And guess what? It's totally normal. And guess what again? It's okay. It's how we get past the dysfunction and get through what's causing the dysfunction and then start moving forward at the tasks at hand. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what a peak performing team does. So that's what we're talking about today. And today we have Paul Glover on the show. And he is the No B.S. workplace development coach for who's been working for the past 30 years and helping you, the leader, and your organizations to achieve their full potential. Paul has a practical approach, hands-on, grounded in realities of the real world, but he's also work and results oriented. So, just like us here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we want to think big picture. We want to think strategic, but at the same time, a podcast is useless if you can't walk away from it with some actual items to do right now. So hence why Paul was a great fit for the show. Now, during this show, we get into topics such as why a team becomes dysfunctional in the first place, how we get through it, what's holding back leaders from transitioning to a new generation and a new style of leadership, how to enable your teams to become self-organizing teams, why psychological safety is important to teams, how to build relationships with all of your team members, and so much more. No doubt you are going to walk away from this episode with a lot of great things that you can apply right now. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the goal here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. So, with further ado, why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Paul Glover about getting past a dysfunctional workplace. Paul, my friend, welcome to the podcast, sir. So good to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to your audience.
So we're talking today about dysfunctional teams, leadership communication, all things of that nature, kind of want to dive straight in and go, what causes teams to be dysfunctional in the first
Well,
place?
the primary reason why a team becomes dysfunctional is because the team leader doesn't allow it to function as a team. The Gallup has done engagement surveys now for the last 20 years, but they also do another survey once a year, and that is the engagement level of team leaders. And they are as unengaged as the teams are. So 2/3 of team leaders are unengaged. 20% of them are actually totally toxic. So only 20% of all team leaders have the capacity to actually be engaged and run a functional team. Leadership is obviously very important for any task, but when you look at a disengaged, uninterested, and maybe toxic leader, the team doesn't have a choice. The team will be dysfunctional. And that's the primary problem with most teams. Google has done extensive research on this, and only 10% of all people who are employed have the capacity to be appropriate leaders. Especially now, the pandemic has changed the definition of leadership, and it's a change that has not been adopted by most team leaders because it's taken the concept of team leadership and it's put another layer on it. And that layer is the need, the requirement that you suddenly become personal with your team members. That goes absolutely against any training that any team leader had before 2019. You were to be professional. You were not to engage your employees on a personal level. And that's now over. That's no longer an acceptable mode of leadership. The problem is the people who are in charge, the team leaders, have not changed in 2 years. They are still command and control, professional, not personal, and they haven't made the transition. So when we start talking about dysfunction teams, it starts at the top. And at that point, if it is a dysfunctional leader, again, my contention is you can't have a functional team. They will struggle to get by. It's not that they don't get tasks done, but the concept of having a team is that it's supposed to be greater than the sum of its parts. Otherwise, just have individual contributors. And the reality is the potential of a team should definitely be that when you put people together in the appropriate equation, they should be able to produce, through discretionary effort, a greater results than individuals. And by the way, what I look at, and I go, we talk about teams as if that's what they are. They aren't teams, they're groups. They're groups of individuals that are not necessarily working together. And clearly this is a leadership issue. So you start there. Does it have to change? Well, I would suggest that first leadership has to change. It has to come to the realization that the requirements to be a leader of a team has got to be completely different than it was a couple of years ago. And then those people who are in those positions have got to go through the transition. And they are kicking and screaming about not doing that. The work from home process, from my perspective, is as effective when it comes to production and results, if not more so than working in the office. However, the problem with that is team leaders and leaders in general hate not being able to see people work because the level of trust is not there. So if I can't see you, I can't trust that you're working. Now that's absolute BS because what we should be after here is results. If you're getting the results from the people who are on this team, whether it be virtual or in the office, what's your problem? Except for the fact that you can't control them. So if we want to look at dysfunction, it absolutely starts at the top. And what we're seeing now, I believe, because the dearth of qualified team leaders is leading companies to look at self-directed teams, autonomous teams, Teams that come together to do a project, and there is no designated leader. Whoever has the subject matter expertise for that particular part of the project becomes the lead for that part of the project. This is what I believe the future of teams looks like. Because again, I can't connect the dysfunction of leadership to a team and say that's the way it should be. And let me just throw out a couple of more. I'm a research geek on this stuff. 50% of all employees are not working up to their capacity. 50%. So when you look at this, you go, that is a leadership issue. It's not they don't have the potential. It's not that they don't have the training. It's not even that they don't have the desire. They have no one that leads them so that they could look at what their potential is and do what's necessary to reach that potential. The reality is that requires discretionary effort. People who are poor leaders don't get that because you have to earn it. You don't pay for it. You can't buy it. So if you want that level of productivity, that is a high performance team, it requires discretionary effort. It requires the people on that team want to work to their potential, and they only do that when they respect the person who leads.
Wow, those are some interesting and very scary statistics in there, especially the number 20% are effective leaders.
Absolutely. It's actually
That. But at the same time, I'm not shocked.
well,
It's right because my whole tagline is lead, don't boss, and guess the reason why I've come up with that. I think you can put two and two together pretty quick, right? I've had a good history of bosses, vice leaders that I've been under.
but also, and by the way, I obviously it sounds like I'm attacking team leaders. I'm not. I'm attacking the organization that decides to promote someone because they need a body. And they don't train them, they don't develop them, and they throw them in the deep end and hope they can swim. And when they
sink or swim, buds.
Go ahead.
Here we go. Go have at it, right?
And that's not the way. You've got the leadership is so sophisticated anymore. And look what you want team leaders to do. This is not the assembly line, and that's our problem. We still have our mind in the assembly line mode, where you didn't have to worry about anybody except showing up and standing there and doing piecework. That's not what we do anymore as leaders, right? We've got knowledge employees, and knowledge employees are smart. And you've got to be able to interact with them on a completely different level, and that's not happening. And it has nothing to do with the team leaders. It has to do with the organizations that refuse to accept that leadership has changed. Therefore, you have to put the effort into developing leaders. They will develop the team.
Yeah, you said something interesting there, and that is, the workers are so smart. And I've been saying for quite some time now that the role of leadership used to be having all the answers, and that's no longer the case. The role of the leader is actually have all the right questions now to ask, and you have the smart people that provide you with the answers. And what you do as a leader is make the best decision possible based off the information you have present.
One of the traits of the post-pandemic leader is to be perpetually curious. They have got to be curious about the employees and about every situation, because my contention is we should know by now that trouble's coming. We just don't know from what point, what position. So let's be, and you know how we prepare for that? We are perpetually curious, because the person who knows where the trouble's coming from is one of the team members. And they know because they are there on the front line dealing with the customer, dealing with the vendor, dealing with production, manufacturing, whatever it may be. They're the ones that are the direct liaison. They can sense when something's going wrong, but they don't have the psychological safety, the permission to tell the truth, so they don't say anything. They don't believe it's their job. So they'll let something go sideways when they knew that it was going there and feel no regret whatsoever.
Oh, you're hitting a good chord with me now. You're talking about psychological safety. I had a former guest on the show quite some time ago. Yeah, no, he's not probably. He is the most quoted guest of the show, and that is a gentleman named Tim Clark. And Tim Clark wrote the book, The Four Stages of Psychological Safety. And that is what you're referring to is contributor safety, according to Tim, the ability to pass information up with having it accepted advice being thrown back at them, as in if they didn't have contributor safety, the employee would pass information up, and then the leader, quote unquote leadership would go, "What do you know?" and slam it back in their face.
Absolutely. By the way,
You
that
know,
happens once, and
right?
everybody says, "Huh, be the last time I do
Yeah.
that."
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and
Yep.
so what you
Absolutely.
have here is bystanders. The team members become bystanders. They watch. And that's what they do. It's kind of like watching an accident in slow. And I tell people, if you're standing on the side of the road and you see two cars coming together, you know there's going to be a crash. All you do is watch. And why? What can I do to stop the crash? Nobody's listening to me. I can't run out in the middle of the road. They'll just run me over. So the reality is exactly that. We have taught the team not to have a mind, not to have an opinion, not to have an initiative. By the way, we keep asking for that, but we really don't want it because we don't set the groundwork so it can occur. So leadership has learned all the words, the verbiage, the jargon, but they don't believe it, and therefore nothing changes. So, but what has changed? Obviously, everybody's well aware the pandemic has caused what we're calling the great reshuffle, the great resignation, the great whatever. But that's the employee saying, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore here because of leadership. That's why they leave. I know everybody fixates on dollars, but that's not why employees leave. Obviously, they want the money, but the primary reason they leave is that it's either a toxic environment or leadership is so bad that they can't tolerate it anymore. They would prefer to risk going to a new job. The fact they get some additional money is great, but that's not the primary reason. I mean, the statistics are just too clear on this. The research is too clear. So, guess what? If you're losing employees, you deserve to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If
It,
you've
it,
got attrition, you earned it. But by the way, I used to be a union organizer. And one of the things I would tell employers is you get the union you deserve. And guess what? This is employees saying, I'm as mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. And they go someplace else. Now, by the way, they may regret it, may not be any better, but they're so full of crap about how their current company treats them that they're willing to take the risk. It's tough for somebody to quit a job and go someplace else. It's a brand new, scary experience. But they're more than willing to do that because they're not going to take it anymore. And I'm happy to see that.
no, you're totally right. Employees don't leave jobs; they leave bad bosses, right?
Absolutely. And we forget
And
that. We keep forgetting because
yeah.
employers are transactional and employees are not willing to work for someone who's transactional. That's the dollar, right? I will pay you to do your job. You never get discretionary effort. You never get potential. All you get's 40 hours. You get what you pay for. Then they leave. But what we've seen because of the pandemic in particular, it was moving in that direction, is that employees do not want transaction. They want relationships. And if they can't have a relationship, then they don't want to work for you.
So on that note, then, we've talked about how to not have dysfunctional teams. You identified first off, be a engaged leader. Second thing is allow the team some autonomy and and able to organize themselves. Psychological safety obviously important. Now the relationship aspect of it. So what's your advice to leaders out there? How should they go about building relationships with their teams? Because as you've clearly pointed out, in the past it's be professional. You know, show up to work, interact with business only, leave work, don't interact.
But heck, we're in a day and age now that you can't get away from your employees if you're an employer. Like there's all the social media, everyone knows everything about everyone. Like so what's the best way for the leaders out there to build those relationships with their teams to hit that peak
Well,
performing level?
first, excellent question and such a simple answer. First, your team is made up of human beings, right? I mean, we sometimes believe that they're only a production asset. That's not what they are. Whenever I talk to someone who's an Excel sheet guy, spreadsheet, my first thing in the coaching program is to say, just remember, every number on that sheet has a face behind it. And if you don't know what makes that face satisfied, you won't get your number, because that's the connection that people understand. So when we start thinking about this, I've broken it down to what I call the three A's. The three A's of relationship building for a high performance team. And the first one is attraction. And that has nothing to do with physical beauty. Attraction is positivity. Attraction is authenticity. Attraction is vulnerability. We know all the words, right? That's what people are drawn to at work. Or guess what? In life. You want to be around someone who has positive energy, who has a vision, who has a story to tell, because stories are where you make the human connection. So attraction is our first A. The second A is attention. Everybody wants to be paid attention to, whether it's at work or whether it's in your social life. So guess what? Pay attention to them. Don't ignore them. Don't pretend they don't exist. Be there and be present. Be engaged in what they're engaged in the workplace. And the third one is appreciation. Say thank you. Acknowledge the effort, the contribution, the results. Three A's. That's it. That is being human with another human, because we all need exactly those three things. And if we give those as a leader, we will get back a commitment. And the commitment will be to go on the journey, whatever that journey is described as, that is important to the team leader. That's it. I mean, I wish I could tell you it's more complicated. We have a tendency to complicate the crap out of everything we put our hands on, because I don't know why. Subject matter experts really want to complicate things so it looks like they're the only ones with the answer. This is the simplest way to do this. If you do it, you will get engagement. And if you get engagement, you get results, you get outcome, but you also get a commitment from the employees to participate in the journey.
Yeah, you're so right. Like it is simple. It really is. And you're right. People do have a tendency to overcomplicate things. I was being interviewed on a podcast once, and everyone looks at leadership in general as a complex topic. And when I talked about how I view leadership uh, in my three domains and explained how I came up with that and how I believe what leadership is, i.e., what we do, and then who we lead, and he was like, "Wow, that you simplified that really well." And it's like it's not. It doesn't have to be complicated. We make it seem to be complicated, but the reality is, core of leading people is fairly simple at its core. When we make it complicated, that's when things go hairy. And I really like what you talk about in building relationships. And I talk about simple things that we can do to do that, like actual things. And it's like, hey, when you show up to work in the morning, in the traditional office work sense, obviously, don't spend, don't go behind your desk immediately and start checking email. Take your cup of coffee and walk around and talk about your team, talk to your team members. And oh, by the way, don't talk shop with them. Talk about their evening, what they did, learn, their daughter's dance recital or whatever, the game. I don't care as long as it's not shop. And they're like, why? I'm just like, because that's how you build the relationship with the individuals out there. That's how they learn about you, you learn about them, and all of a sudden trust gets built. And it's not around the Excel spreadsheet, it's around a cup of coffee and what happened the night
And
before.
you're spot
So
on, because the end results of that relationship is the productivity and the profit. It happens. If that's what you're worrying about first, you'll never get what you want because the relationship will not be there to create it. Now, I understand you can threaten people and beat people, but you know what? Now they're leaving. So, guess what? That's not working anymore. So, you better understand that this is how you get what you want. Give them that relationship that they want. In fact, you should want it. Why wouldn't you? And you're absolutely right. When you walk in the door of the office or the plant or the facility, how about you actually look like you're happy to be there instead of that perpetual frown that leaders love, that stony face? Because what you told people with that look is don't approach me. I am unapproachable. You had said it earlier. I have all the answers. I am omnipotent. If there's a problem, I will solve it. Therefore, don't think. I don't want anybody here thinking. If there's a problem, it gets to my desk, I'll take care of it. Well, you know what? The issue with that is, even though human relationships, I think, have gotten a lot easier and have always been, the problems have gotten a lot more complicated. And we can't solve them on our own. We need the team and we need that expertise. Therefore, the relationship, they enter into that with us, common goal, common purpose, a mission, meaning, whatever, we can keep putting labels on it, and we work this together. That's success. Sorry, Scott, you're
Yeah, no, there we go. I somehow made a fatal error in podcasting and was talking with the mic muted. That's got to be a first. We're going to leave this in for fun. Why? Because we keep it real here. Uh, and what I was saying was, I agree with a lot of what you had to say there, especially the part about the leader showing with the stone cold face look, right? And what does that actually achieve? It achieves nothing, and it actually gives you the inverse of what you want. It makes you non approachable. And let's tie this back to things you talked about earlier. And as if you're unapproachable, you can't achieve psychological safety. Therefore, people are not going to bring up problems or potential problems. And that means you're not going to get the results that you
no.
want and that you're looking
What
for.
what you will get is hit in the side of the face by the black swan event that someone else saw coming but didn't tell you. So let me tell you, that's what you get. Also, as we talk about this new leadership, because I do think that post-pandemic there is a new leadership formula. One part of that is humor. I truly believe that it is incumbent upon team leaders to make people smile. I, as a part of my coaching, every hour that I spend with a person in my program, one part of my goal is to make them smile, laugh. If say something ridiculous, I don't care what you dance upside down, wear a funny hat, do something that makes people want to smile. Curiously, that is a relationship builder on its own. One of the things that I require and have gone back to it since the pandemic is everyone in my coaching program is required to take an improvisation class because that's when leaders learn how to give. That's what improv is all about. And because most leaders are takers, it is a struggle for them, but if they stay with it, they will learn the elements of giving. And to me, that's a part of the gig. You got to be able to give, not just take. And a part of that is doing silly things, whatever that may be, having a party, telling a joke about yourself, not about somebody else, is all about creating a human connection. By the way, another thing is talk about your failures. I know you've got them. Stop pretending like you've never failed. You know, I love Winston Churchill's quote: success is stumbling from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. And that's what most leaders do. We struggle, we struggle for success, we fail, we continue on the journey. And if you share that with people when we start talking about psychological safety, if you tell people about your failures, you make it okay for them to tell you about theirs. That's when we start sharing relevant information.
Yeah, there's so much good in there. I'm not a huge quote guy, but I do appreciate that one for Winston Churchill for sure. I think the big thing regarding around failures is that whole egocentric thing, right? Where leaders need to be seen as having it all together all the time and knowing everything and blah 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 and all this crap. Well, guess what? Population this day and age are highly educated, very intelligent, smart. They sniff BS out with seconds. So we need to get away from that. In fact, I like your further point to it that it instills psychological safety. It enables if I can talk about my failures, which I do regularly. Then it enables my team to do it. And then your early point about humor, well, that's a great time to add humor in, right? Like, and nothing better than self-deprecating humor as a leader. You're like, I was such an idiot. Like, what the heck was I thinking? If I could go back, and this is one I use all the time. If I go back in time, I'd strangle myself like Homer on Bart Simpson.
Yeah, that's a good one. But you're absolutely
Right?
You don't make jokes about anybody else. You make jokes about yourself. Self-deprecating humor is absolutely acceptable and clearly something that people are surprised when they get it, but they're also happy when they get it. Like I said, it makes a human connection when you admit that you've failed. The hardest people for me to coach are successful people. And I have to remind them that you got here by failing. Every failure is a seed for that success. As long as you don't stop, right? You keep on and you make it happen. But the reality is you've got to understand and be self-aware about your failures because that's what makes you a human being. Human beings are not perfect. We have flaws. Share them a little bit, right? Now, by the way, I'm, again, personal, not intimate. Because there do have to be some guardrails, right? I'm not going to be your friend, but I am going to be somebody that has a connection with you, or maybe just a work connection. And we're going to have that connection because it benefits both of us to have it.
Oh, makes absolute sense. Paul, sir, this has been a very interesting topic, very interesting conversation about dysfunctional teams and this dysfunctional leadership in general, and one I've definitely enjoyed. Before we wrap up here, I do got a couple last questions for you. And first being a question I ask all the guests here at the podcast, and it's according to you, Paul Glover, what makes a great leader?
What makes a great leader? Well, I can give you what the characteristics are, but let's start off with you have to care. If you don't care, you can't lead because no one will trust you if you don't care. The second one,
starts with caring.
Let me give you the second one. You also have to be a great storyteller because storytelling is a human connection that goes back to the time when we climbed out of the trees and the savannas in Africa. It is a skill set that is required. People want to hear the story.
And final question of the show. Where can people find you, follow you, be part of your journey, sir? It's all about you right now.
It's Paul at paulglovercoaching.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn at Paul Glover Coaching.
Too easy. And for you, the listener, it's easy as always. Just go to lead.boss/231-231. The links are in the show notes. Paul, sir, thanks again for taking time out of your schedule and coming and talk to us today.
Absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope that the audience found it to be relevant.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend. Win-win all around, and hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.